Audrey Dean tightened the worn strap of her tote bag as she stood across the gleaming glass doors of Le Marais, the city's most talked-about restaurant. The soft murmur of voices and subtle clinking of wine glasses floated out to meet her, mingling with the faint scent of aged oak and citrus zest. This night was a quiet rebellion against the years of long hours and pepper-stained aprons at the diner where she worked, a small family-run place serving breakfast and lunches to regulars who smiled but never quite saw her. She wore a simple, faded navy dress she'd found at the thrift shop, ironed as well as she could manage, and she clutched her tote bag, patched and softened from years of groceries and cookbooks, like a talisman. Audrey knew she might not belong here, amidst the polished marble and crystal chandeliers, but she had saved every spare tip, skipped lunches more times than she cared to count, all for this, a tasting menu paired with wine selected by a renowned sommelier. As the maitre d' approached, Audrey summoned a hopeful smile. "I have a reservation under Dean," she said softly. The man nodded but barely glanced at her before leading her through the bustling dining room, where elegant couples and sharply dressed patrons whispered over flickering candles. When the sommelier came to present the wine list, Audrey's heart pounded. "I'd like to see the wine list, please," she said, her voice steady but shy. His eyes narrowed, lips curling into a smirk. "The wine list is not for everyone," he replied sharply, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Only those who understand may choose. You should leave the guessing to the experts." The room quieted for a heartbeat, and Audrey's cheeks burned as a flush of humiliation washed over her. She felt every eye, every judgment, and for a moment, she wished she could disappear. The sommelier's words echoed faintly in Audrey's mind as she turned away from the polished tables, the murmur of polite conversation resuming around her but feeling like a cruel soundtrack to her swift retreat. A few patrons at nearby tables exchanged uneasy glances. Some covered their mouths with silk napkins as if trying to hide nervous laughter, while others looked away, pretending not to notice the brief rupture in the evening's elegance. A small group at a corner table smirked openly, whispering to one another with a sharpness that made Audrey's skin crawl. Her fingers tightened around the worn strap of her tote bag, the only anchor she had in that moment. She walked carefully toward the exit, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. Every step felt heavier, like the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments pressing down on her slender frame. The cool air hit her as she stepped onto the pavement outside, the noise of the city swirling around her like an indifferent crowd. She sank onto a nearby bench beneath a flickering street lamp, trying to steady her breath that had gone shallow, caged by the sting of humiliation. The shadows of the night mirrored the thoughts tumbling through her mind, the sacrifices, the silences, and the long invisible stretches of time that had led her here. Audrey dwelled quietly on the months she'd toiled in the diner's cramped kitchen, hands submerged in dishwater, scraping burnt pans after dawn, and turning out orders in a voice far softer than she wished it to be. She remembered dinners eaten alone, pockets carefully pinched to stretch scarce dollars, skipping meals so she could stash away a bit more cash for this night. There had been no grand celebrations, no applause, just quiet determination and the faint spark of a dream. Her thoughts drifted to that evening 2 years ago when a regular customer, Mr. Whitaker, a retired professor with crinkled eyes that twinkled behind thick glasses, had taken a moment to describe the nuances of a Bordeaux bottle to her, sharing the story as if revealing a secret treasure. Audrey's tongue had tingled with curiosity then, her world briefly expanding beyond simmering pots and clattering plates. One day, she'd thought softly then, I'd taste wines like that, not just hear about them. Tonight was supposed to be the one day she treated herself to that world, the silky reds, the crisp whites carefully paired to enhance each course of an exquisite meal made by chefs whose names she only read in magazines. Tonight she was to celebrate her 40th birthday and the small but meaningful promotion at the diner that had come with a bit more respect and slightly longer hours of the day to herself. It was meant to be the culmination of quiet victories, a reward woven with hope. Now, as she sat on that cold bench, the dream felt harshly clipped, torn at the edges by a curt voice mocking her intentions and the simplicity she carried with her. The lights from inside the restaurant shimmered through the window behind her, casting long reflections of the laughter she was no longer invited to share. Shadows tangled with memories, the contest she'd won years ago, her rare moments of encouragement from the few who had seen her effort, all mingling with the ache of being stripped bare by a single, careless dismissal. Yet beneath the hurt, deeper than the bruised pride, a new quiet started to take root. Audrey wasn't the woman who had always accepted quiet corners or diminished her dreams. This night had unveiled something else, the fragile strength to move forward despite the coldness of an unexpected world. Minutes passed uncounted as she pulled her coat tighter around herself. The city carried on without pause, cars slipping by, streetlights flickering overhead, the distant siren's cry humming its indifferent tune. Audrey's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes cleared. The sting of shame dulled, replaced by the resolve to rise above this fracture, to not let one cruel moment define the entire story she had lived. Slowly, she stood, brushing the night's dust from her dress. The dream was bruised, yes, but it wasn't gone. In the quiet street, with just the night for company, Audrey Dean began to gather herself again, ready to carry on walking, to distance herself from what was and consider what could be, even if only in small, stubborn steps. Audrey stepped off the bench, the cold concrete beneath her feet grounding her as the initial wave of humiliation slowly ebbed, replaced by a quiet determination. The city's lights blurred through the haze in her eyes, but she straightened her shoulders and began walking away from Le Marais. She didn't look back, but her mind refused to leave the restaurant behind. Somewhere in the warmth of those polished walls where laughter and music flowed, she could hear the sour note of the sommelier's cruel words echoing. Her footsteps carried her down a narrow alley unusual for bustling city life, quieter and less polished than the main avenue. It was the sort of place she never noticed before, somehow invisible in her routine existence. But tonight, her gaze caught something out of place, a side door left slightly ajar, a gap at a usually fastened staff entrance. Curiosity nudged her closer. As she passed, she glimpsed into the shadowed space, seeing workers moving hurriedly, carting boxes and empty bottles. A male employee, wrapping up his shift, bantered with a colleague. Audrey's ears picked up a careless joke. "They dump all the leftover bottles at night," the man said, chuckling. "Better than donating them to charity." "Too much hassle." Audrey frowned. She edged nearer, eyes scanning the large dumpster beyond the open door. It was overflowing with half-empty, beautifully labeled wine bottles, their colorful labels catching the weak light. The dumpster's lid barely shut, but tags marked it recyclables. The sad contrast between the luxurious image inside the restaurant and this waste struck her deeply. She had heard of charities that accepted unopened bottles or surplus wine to help fund community projects or shelters. The image of such waste stabbed her with inequality that ran deeper than snobbish dismissals, a stark reminder of privilege hiding behind facades of elegance. This wasn't just about her being mocked. It was about a careless disregard for resources that could be used to bridge the gap instead of accentuate it. Slowly, she pulled her phone from the well-worn tote bag, fingers fumbling for the camera. She took a few quiet photos of the overflowing dumpster and the bottles, careful not to attract attention. Then, listening briefly, she caught another fragment of conversation. One worker muttered, "We're not even licensed to handle donations, so better to dump it." Her brow furrowed further. If true, it meant the wastefulness was compounded by negligence or ignorance of regulations designed to protect both donors and recipients. It wasn't just careless, it was wrong. Audrey felt a surge of resolve welling up within her. Despite the evening's bitterness, an opportunity flickered in the shadows, to turn this moment into something worthwhile, to give hope a foothold. That night, sitting by her kitchen table back at home, she drafted an email with steady fingers. She sent her story and photographic evidence to a local food blog she followed, a small but growing platform that focused on community issues and fair treatment, and also reached out to a well-known investigative journalist at the Times who frequently covered consumer affairs. Her message was simple but clear, an account of her experience at the restaurant's wine list, the sommelier's public humiliation, and, more importantly, the wasteful dumping of expensive wine bottles that could have served the community. She asked if they could help bring light to these concerns, hoping quietly that her voice might find a wider audience. After sending the messages, Audrey set her phone aside, the hum of the city outside mingling with the nervous flutter in her chest. The moment was unexpectedly empowering, a step beyond silence, a quiet stand against something bigger than herself. The night stretched ahead, uncertain but not empty. Before sleep took her, Audrey pictured that dusty tote bag resting by the door, no longer a symbol of her otherness, but a quiet reminder of courage she didn't know she held. With that thought, she finally let the day's events wash away and surrendered to the dark. Audrey's story began to ripple through the city with unexpected speed. The local food blogger she'd contacted first posted a heartfelt account of Audrey's experience, weaving together the quiet humiliation, the glaring waste of unopened wine, and the contrast between hospitality's promised warmth and cold exclusion. The post was shared dozens of times within hours, readers resonating with the tale's honesty. Comments poured in, sympathy, outrage, and personal accounts from others who had been snubbed or ignored in similar edifices of luxury. Within days, a journalist from a major publication picked up the piece. The Times published an article titled, "When Elitism Meets a Simple Cook, Dignity and Waste in Fine Dining," framing Audrey's experience against a larger critique of wastefulness and elitism in upscale restaurants. The piece was concise but poignant, describing the scene in meticulous detail and calling out the restaurant's practice of dumping expensive wine by the bottle. Public reaction was immediate and varied. Social media exploded with viewers expressing solidarity, especially from workers in hospitality and everyday people who recognized the humiliation Audrey endured. "I've lost count of the times I've been made to feel invisible in places like that," one comment read. Another said, "Waste on this scale is just wrong, there should be better ways." The restaurant's reputation, once sparkling, began to tarnish under a wave of public scrutiny. Le Marais' management responded swiftly with a formal statement. They expressed regret for the sommelier's behavior, calling it unacceptable and not reflective of our values. They announced suspension of the employee pending a full review and promised a thorough examination of their waste management policies. The statement was carefully crafted, attempting to quell the growing criticism without admitting direct wrongdoing. Meanwhile, authorities responsible for health and environmental standards initiated a surprise review of the restaurant. They discovered improper disposal protocols, including failure to properly document and donate surplus wine as required by local regulations. While the establishment was not shut down, warnings and fines were issued, and the management was compelled to implement new sustainable practices. Among these were partnerships with local charities to donate unopened wine and reduce waste. The suspended sommelier became a focal point for public attention, his arrogance and dismissive attitude widely condemned. Social media profiles bearing his name were flooded with criticism, and former patrons publicly questioned his character. In the restaurant's internal communications leaked online, a majority of staff expressed discomfort with his demeanor but felt powerless to speak up before the incident brought the issue to light. Throughout the frenzy, Audrey watched from the quiet side of her life, overwhelmed but determined. Messages of support arrived from all directions: friends, co-workers, even strangers inspired by her courage. Flowers appeared on the counter at the diner, and a few regulars insisted on paying for her meals as a small gesture of gratitude. Her co-workers rallied around her, sharing stories of their own quiet injustices and expressing pride in her stand. More than one or two simple customers came forward with similar experiences. Encouraged by Audrey's example, they spoke out about elitism in fine dining and the fragile dignity of being treated with respect regardless of background. Community groups began organizing discussions about inclusivity and fairness in hospitality, both locally and online. Audrey's modest statement, that she just wanted to enjoy a night of good food and wine without being mocked, struck a chord in many hearts. Her experience became a catalyst, not only shining harsh light on a restaurant's flaws but also spurring conversations about kindness, equality, and sustainability in places that often seemed reserved for a privileged few. Little by little, the city's dining culture started to shift. Other restaurants reviewed their practices, some adopting more transparent and inclusive policies towards staff and customers alike. Charity organizations saw a rise in donations from establishments eager to avoid similar scandals. Audrey's name came to represent a quiet but powerful challenge to an entrenched status quo. For Audrey, the unexpected wave of change felt like a delicate thread weaving hope through an otherwise ordinary life. She hadn't set out to start a movement, only to claim a slice of happiness on one night. Yet, by standing firm, she had sparked something larger, something that rippled beyond her own small world, making it a little kinder, a little fairer, and infinitely more dignified. Weeks had passed since Audrey's story made headlines, but life at the diner had settled into a new rhythm, one infused with quiet warmth and a growing sense of shared pride. The early morning sun slanted through the small windows, casting soft glimmers over pots and pans as Audrey moved with practiced ease behind the counter. Her hands, often coated in flour and broth, now seemed to carry a different kind of confidence, a steady grace born not of grandeur but of courage found in standing up for herself. Her dress was still simple and well-worn, the faded navy fabric soft from countless washes, but she carried it differently now. When she walked through her tight-knit town, regular customers gathered around to offer nods of recognition and words of respect, their smiles less polite and more genuine. There was something contagious about her quiet strength that made people stand a little taller themselves. One afternoon, as Audrey wiped down the counter, her phone buzzed softly beside the register. The message was from a community advocate who had been inspired by her story to start a local initiative donating surplus food and wine to shelters. The note was warm and full of gratitude, inviting Audrey to attend their upcoming event as a guest speaker, an opportunity she never imagined would be hers. The words made her heart flutter with a mix of nervousness and pride. She hadn't yet decided whether she would accept, but the very offer felt like validation. A few days later, a letter arrived from Immerse. The envelope was elegant, embossed with the restaurant's crest. Inside, the management offered a sincere apology for the distress caused by the sommelier's conduct and detailed the steps they had taken to amend their policies, including staff retraining on inclusivity and the establishment of a charity partnership to donate leftover wine. They invited Audrey to visit again, this time as a welcomed guest with a guided wine tasting, hoping to make amends. She read it thoughtfully, a calm smile spreading across her face. After a moment, she set the letter down without a reply, feeling no bitterness, only a quiet closure. On a bright morning walk past the restaurant, Audrey noticed a new sign proudly announcing the partnership with several local charities and emphasizing sustainable practices. The glossy poster stood in sharp contrast with the night she had faced not so long ago, brimming instead with hope and change. For a brief moment, her fingers grazed the worn handle of her tote bag as she continued down the street with steady steps. Back in the diner, Audrey savored a simple cup of tea, the aroma of chamomile filling the air as she leaned back in her chair and exchanged laughter with her coworkers. Their camaraderie felt richer than ever for having weathered the storm together. The slow, steady hum of the morning rush filled the room, but beneath it was a quiet celebration of dignity reclaimed and respect won, not by grand gestures, but by the strength of a simple woman who refused to be silenced. Audrey Dean didn't need titles, fine clothes, or lavish settings to define her worth. She had something rarer, a courage that carried her through humiliation and sparked a ripple far beyond what she could have imagined. And in that courage, she found a dignity that no wine list or restaurant could ever take away.